And on behalf of our faculty, Drs. Tyrone Howard, Audra Langley, Patricia Lester, and Todd Frankie, we are so glad you are here. I want to thank the Watts Labor Community Action Committee and Mudtown Farms for hosting us. Can we all give this space a beautiful round of applause? Recognizing that this land that we are on here today, the way that it looks now, looked nothing like this a mere few years ago, goes to show what so much TLC, love, care, and commitment can do when we cultivate space. We also want to thank the Olive Branch Church for hosting our parking. They came through in a major pinch. Thank you, Olive Branch Church. And of course, we'd like to thank our team. I want to thank our faculty for their leadership and our staff, our beloved, beloved staff, Brenda, Laura, Christine, and Anna. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes, massive round of applause. We want to thank our students in the blue shirts representing UCLA today, getting you all here, out there in the sun, with a smile. They are the best. We love them. Thank you all so much. We also want to thank Supervisor Holly J. Mitchell, just re-elected for 4 more years. Let's give her a shout out. She's on her way. We'll give her a shout out when she gets here again. And we want to thank DCFS, led by the illustrious and humble Brandon Nichols. Thank you, Brandon, for the opportunity to join hands to do this difficult and yet necessary work together. And another big thank you to our friends Dr. Scorza and Dr. Hunter for being with us today and joining our panel discussion. Thank you both. So everyone here can agree that LA is home to like the best things in the world: the beaches, the sports, the hiking trails, the restaurants, places like Mudtown Farms. And yet, as everyone in this room also knows, LA is also home to the largest foster care system in the country. And this is especially problematic for Black families who are referred, investigated, removed, and disproportionately represented in foster care at higher rates than any other demographic. At the UCLA Pritzker Center, our work is to ask why. What can be done about this? What can be done to prevent and keep families safely out of the child welfare system? And for the children who need foster care due to actual abuse and neglect, what can be done to improve the system? We ask these questions through a multidisciplinary, cross-campus, community-based lens. We do this work hand in hand with faculty, staff, and students, community researchers, people with lived experience, with different degrees, with different training, with different backgrounds, expertise in law, medicine, public policy, social work, mental health, education, and more. We approach this work with the whole child and the whole family in our minds and in our hearts. Speaking of heart, today you'll meet some of our extraordinary students. They'll be practicing their public speaking, learning to become the next generation of child and family serving professionals. For our center, Justice for Children and Families is a 360-degree effort rooted in research, education, and partnership. This event is one such example of bringing together university partners, state and local government, advocates, philanthropy, and the community for a collective and perhaps uncomfortable conversation about the single most pressing issue facing our child welfare system today: racism. Indeed, we have centered this conversation about our research here in Watts and at a farm for a reason. We believe in getting proximate. By getting proximate, we shift from theoretical discussions and engage directly with the realities of institutional racism faced by those who experience the injustices we write about. This community, having faced significant and unspeakable loss following the Watts riots, is literally growing a renaissance all around us. We believe the same can be true for our child welfare system. No one demonstrates this belief more than Supervisor Mitchell. Thank you so much for joining us today. And for making possible this research, not through just one motion, but multiple bold efforts and strategies to once and for all consciously bring to an end the role we all play in aiding and abetting the bias that perpetuates harm for families. In this spirit, our conversation today will explore blind removal and then move beyond it through an intentional exchange about efforts underway to dismantle and make cognizant the role that race and class play in the decisions we make in the lives of children and families. Thank you so much for joining us, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to our incredible student for our land acknowledgement.
Hello, my name is Amanda Solis, and I am an undergraduate research assistant at the UCLA Pritzker Center. I am majoring in sociology and minoring in Chicano Central American Studies in hopes of becoming an immigration attorney in the future. UCLA is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples. We recognize the Gabrielino Tongva peoples as the original stewards of this land and honor their enduring relationship with it. Additionally, we pay our respects to the elders, past and present, and express our gratitude for the continuing contributions of the indigenous people in this region. As members of the UCLA community, we strive to cultivate awareness of rich cultural heritage that exists within our campus and beyond, especially as we gather here today in Watts. The UCLA Pritzker Center is also mindful of the child welfare system's disparate impact on tribal families. Let this acknowledgement serve as a commitment to learning more about the history of the land we occupy and to fostering a spirit of respect, reciprocity, and responsibility towards indigenous people. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Olivia Gilchrist. I am an undergraduate research assistant at the Pritzker Center, and I am studying psychology with the hopes of becoming a child psychologist. I am pleased to introduce Dr. Tyrone Howard. Dr. Tyrone Howard holds the Pritzker Family Endowed Chair and is a professor in the School of Education and Information Studies at UCLA. Dr. Howard is considered one of the premier experts on race, culture, educational equity, and access in the country. Professor Howard has published over 100 peer-reviewed journal articles, book chapters, and technical reports. He has published several best-selling books, including Why Race and Culture Matters in Schools and Black Male, Peril and Promise in the Education of African American Males. Dr. Howard serves as the co-director for the UCLA Pritzker Center for Strengthening Children and Families.
Thanks so much, Olivia. Hello, my name is Isabella Reyna, and I'm an undergraduate research assistant at the UCLA Pritzker Center. I'm double majoring in communications and public affairs. I am pleased to introduce Director Brandon Nichols. The Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors appointed Brandon Nichols Director of the Los Angeles County Department of Children and Family Services in April of 2022. Director Nichols is regarded throughout the nation as an accomplished professional with more than 20 years of expertise in child welfare, foster care, adoptions, mental health, and law. Director Nichols previously held the roles of DCFS Chief Deputy Director and Acting Director. Prior to that, he served as an attorney for the Los Angeles County Counsel's Office, where he represented and advised DCFS for a number of years. Please welcome Dr. Howard and Director Nichols to the stage for a conversation about our report on the Blind Removal Project.
Can we give our students a big round of applause for being able to stand here? Thank you. Shout out to our amazing Pritzker team. Taylor Dudley deserves a huge round of applause. Thank all of you for being here on a Friday afternoon. I'm sure there are lots of different places you could have been, but you are choosing to be here, and that means a lot to us because there's a lot of decision-making power, a lot of influential power in this room, and we think that collectively we we can make this work happen. But before I start with Brandon, we would not be here were it not for what I call audacious and courageous leadership of one Supervisor Holly J. Mitchell. Can we give her a round of applause? Right? It's one thing to talk about having hard conversations and moving the needle. It's another thing to offer motions to say we will have the uncomfortable conversations. And we would not be here talking about blind removal were it not for your vision, your courage, and your wisdom, Supervisor Mitchell. So for that, we say thank you so much. Again, another round of applause. Now let's get to it. The man of the hour. That's what I'm going to call you, Brandon. Is that okay? Call you Brandon, man of the hour. So I want to start this conversation about our report, but before I get into some of the logistics of the report, I want to do a level set and see if you could just give us an overview of where we are with the department in terms of what we see, in terms of the number of young people in care, kind of the things that are most pressing and things that you are doing right now around the current state of DCFS.
Excuse me. So let's talk about that. I mentioned to someone out in the courtyard there, I think this is the best time in the history of the department to be the director. I mean that seriously. I don't think we'd be having conversations like this in the community with the folks in this room maybe even 3 years ago, 4 years ago, certainly not 5 years ago, and I've been involved in the department going back to 25 years. This is the best time because we're all sort of lined up right now to do the right thing by families. And we have political sponsorship like we've never had before. The leadership within the department, and I'm not saying me, I'm saying the people underneath me and the leaders that work for me, they get it. And they get it in a way that we've not gotten it before. We've not had our ears open. We haven't seen the way things have been like we do now. I feel very lucky to be here at this moment in time. And things are moving slowly, but moving in the right direction. So in just the last 2-3 years, we've gone from 22,000 children not living with their families down to 15,000. The number of black children entering the system is down in the last 3 years 42%, down 38% for all kids. And I that also keeps me up at night. 42% is a radical change, and I worry about kids being safe. And I look very closely, and my team looks very closely at the measurements we have of safety, and safety has remained good. And kids have remained safe as we've reduced intake so much. We have the lowest number of kids in congregate care that we've ever had. At one point we had over 5,000 children living in what we used to call group homes. I looked at the numbers just this week, 230 kids in congregate care. And now our congregate care is clinical. It's, they're surrounded by mental health professionals, they're addressing trauma, and they're not just being warehoused like they were 3-4 years ago. So things are going well, but we have a long way to go. It's conversations like this, it's studies like this, it's meetings like this that I think are going to keep pushing us to move the needle further.
Yeah. So I appreciate that. And so we're making important progress, but there's still a lot more to go. So one of the things I want to use as a catalyst to move into our conversation around the report is that we saw in the midst of the tragic deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor a massive push towards recognizing that Black Lives Matter, and every different entity across our county, across the state was saying we need to play an intentional sort of focus on what happens with Black families and children. So explain to me how we got here with blind removal, which we'll be talking about shortly.
So, our department had started to have conversations around race before those events. And we had started to make progress, but I think those events emboldened us and pushed the conversation further. And I have to give credit, this is not just to be corny, to Supervisor Mitchell for the vision. So they had done blind removal demonstrations in other jurisdictions. I believe one was New York and Atlanta. But we didn't have the vision here. We were doing something else. Supervisor Mitchell appropriately pushed and challenged us to step up and see what would happen in our communities if we tried blind removal. And that's the kind of moment in time leadership I was referencing earlier, is we have a board and we have leaders who are not only allowing us to do more, but pushing us to do more. And I think it's going to be great.
So as we think about that, one of the things that jumps out is that as we embarked upon this project with the your support, with your cooperation, we wanted to pilot. We wanted to see what it looked like, keeping safety first, right? But we wanted to look at two offices. We looked at Compton Carson and we looked at West LA. Can you talk to us about why those two offices were recommended for this pilot?
I'll talk a little bit about it. One, there's no right or wrong answer in some of this. It's a reasonable decision and just an effort to move things forward. Compton Carson is one of our bigger offices, serves an impacted community, and had already done a lot of good work around addressing racial disproportionality. You know, I mentioned we've been doing some things before blind removal. They were further down the road in their understanding and their education, and I talked about seeing and hearing the problems sometimes we were causing. We also picked West LA, and the reason why we picked West LA in part was just to give us some contrast. West LA is a much smaller office, smallest office in the department, although it serves, I think, the most racially diverse catchment area in our whole department. But they were not as developed, they had not had the conversations, they hadn't moved their practice in the way that Compton Carson did. So we picked one that was further down the road, one that was start of the road, just to see what would be the impact of blind removal in those two different environments.
Can you tell us a little bit about the demographics of the Compton Carson office?
Compton Carson serves a largely Hispanic and Black community, more than West LA does. West LA serves, like I said, a much more diverse community.
So let me get to the elephant in the room. Without going a lot of the details to folks here, our report found that at the end of the day, referrals are down, removals are down, all things which we should be encouraged by. But the disturbing reality is that disproportionality remains. Even with these processes that were implemented at both of these offices, Compton Carson and West LA, we still found that Black children were being removed at disproportionately higher rates than any other group of young people in the county. When you hear that, what comes to mind? What's your reaction? How do you respond?
So, I have mixed feelings about that. I celebrate the safe reduction of kids coming into care, whatever their color. And I know that there are less Black children coming into care than their counterparts. I'm sad that Black children still come into care at a higher percentage rate. And I do think we've narrowed that gap just a little bit by a few percentage points, so I do think there's some promise in this, but we know, and this is, difficult, but we still operate a racist system. We still operate a system that brings Black children into care, that separates Black children from their parents more than other kids. And so what that tells me is, fight's not over. Like yes, things are moving, but we still got a long way to go.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because one of my concerns is that folks will look at part of the story but not look at the entire story. And the part of the story that I think folks can lock in on is that, wow, referrals are down, removals are down, we're really there, and we're not. And I appreciate your response, Brandon, because I think the ways in which we have to talk about historical racism, structural racism, anti-Blackness as a part of the larger society in which we live in, and it manifests itself in all the different sectors, including child welfare. So I think, how do we continue to keep this conversation front and center? Though it may be uncomfortable for some, but I say if it's uncomfortable for us to have the conversation, how uncomfortable is it for families and children who are separated for reasons that they should not?
It's absolutely awful that Black children are separated from their parents because of the color of their skin or the conditions of the community they live in. When we, the government, have created those conditions, it's unconscionable. And it brings chills to my back saying it and thinking about it. It really does. It's hard to talk about. I also want to call out, this study looked at one point in a system, but the system's bigger than that one point. It's before children are called into our hotline, how are they treated? And the data I see, Black children are treated differently. Black families are treated differently. Once a hotline call's made, and we do get involved, how are children treated? At every data point I've looked at, and we did a presentation for our department, Angela Parks-Piles is here. She helped put it on. This was several years ago. At every point we picked, the experience of Black children and Black families was worse. Separation from siblings, return to family, time in care, whether they were adopted or not. Every single point. And that's just data points. That doesn't even talk to the experience of a Black child. We're working with Supervisor Mitchell's office right now around hair care. because we don't have a data point for do you feel empowered in the way you look and the way you dress and how your hair is controlled. But that is an experience too, and we know that the experience is worse for black kids. So it's a long battle with a lot of different battlefiels, and removal is just but one of the places we have to focus.
I appreciate that. So
That's good. That's good.
that's right. So we're having conversations that need to be had. Conversations that happen in that channel, but now we're taking the covers off and having them publicly, continuing to happen, because hopefully discussions lead to long-term change.
Well, you talked about what we're doing next, and I really do think conversations like this need to keep happening. It's how my staff learn the impacts of the decision they're making. It's how they're confronted with the disproportionality that they're creating. I mean, I'm not saying my staff are ill-willed, they're good, loving people, but they don't know sometimes the danger of what they do and the power that we wield, and that there's a safe alternative. And so that's really where we're focused, is how do we build those safe alternatives to turning to child welfare. I mean, the truth is that we run a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week hotline. We're always there. But I would love for people to have some place other to go to get help for families that are wobbling than to call us. We're not the right response. We're the response for safety.
That's right. That's why we're soon have Dr. Hunter who will talk about her initiative around mandated reporting. But before, I think you make an important point about very well-intended people can do significant damage to children and families. So one of the things that we found in the study was that there were some concerns about some current efforts that are already in place, and you know about these. And I think this speaks to the fact that these were conversations that were happening beforehand and some steps that were being taken, specifically around 40X and ERDD. And one of the things we lift up in the report is that there's a need to do a better job of collecting data on the impact that those programs and those interventions had. Can you talk a little bit about where we are and how we're doing with ERDD and with 40X, and how those, along with instruments like blind removal, can collectively begin to move the needle around reducing disproportionality?
That's a pickle. And I'll tell you why. It's a few things. One, we are making progress, and I'm hesitant to stop things that are leading to that progress. Even if I don't have the data and the evidence, it's going in a good direction, and I want more of all that direction. Two, this is not a problem with one easy solution. It's a problem that has to be attacked from multiple angles. We're going to talk about the mandated reporting issue before things get to the hotline. I don't know that there is a magic bullet. I don't know that ERDD alone is a magic bullet. I don't know that cultural brokers alone are a magic bullet. I don't think that blind removal itself is a magic bullet. And I'm going to keep trying different strategies to keep trying to move that needle forward. Now, what you all have done with, and I thank you for that, is to give us some data and some empirical look at whether the strategies are effective or not. And the sad truth is these are complicated decisions and complicated systems, and it's not always so clear. But I believe, from personal experience and from talking to folks, including families, that the ERDD roundtables and cultural brokers are making a difference. Absolutely. And one of the beauties of those things is they're things that came from the community. And I talked about we wouldn't have this conversation maybe 5 years ago. We wouldn't have listened and power shared with the community like we do today. And I'm not patting myself on the back. I'm talking about the people in this room. We have people from the community sit at the table with social workers when we're making those decisions, challenging us, letting us know of resources that are available. And those things, I just know are making a difference. Now, we are going to do some studies, particularly around cultural brokers. For bureaucratic and technical reasons, I can tap into federal money if I can prove with evidence that cultural brokers make the difference that I believe in my heart they make. So we do plan to do some studies to demonstrate that, but I'm hesitant to stop any practices or pause anything or take my foot off the gas when I see that the needle's moving in the right direction. So I guess I want more of all of it at this point. I want the education, and I want the confirmation that I believe can happen, but I'm going to keep pushing this stuff forward.
I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the fact that there were some folks who pushed back on blind removal, and they pushed back for a couple of reasons. Some of them, which I think are warranted. I think for some folks, the idea of a colorblind approach seemed to be problematic because in many ways we know that colorblindness oftentimes perpetuates racism, doesn't alleviate it. That was a core part of what we wanted to look at. Another concern we heard from folks was that we already have a pretty diverse staff working the hotline, doing intake. So if we have a diverse staff, why do we need to look at issues around, racial disproportionality? I would respond to that by saying that you can be a black person and still engage in anti-black practices. So this is about a mindset, not a skin color, not something else, right? Another thing that came up was the fact that workers are already stretched thin, and that this is yet one more thing to have to think about, one more set of practices to engage in. How do you respond to that last sort of retort about the fact that workers are already stretched thin, asked to do lots of different things, and we're adding yet one more thing to their plates?
There's truth to it. But we can't let that stop us from trying different things, because if we don't try different things, we're going to have the same old racist result. That's the truth. It's a challenge to the managers to make the space for that practice to happen. And we had managers in Compton and managers in West LA that committed to making that space. And really what it came down to, at the end of the day, I think was really good social work. It was social workers pausing in their busy day and really thinking about a family and the resources available to them, and then making better decisions. And if we can create that space for good social work, I think we are going to see better decisions.
Good. So there's a number of recommendations we make in the report, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you while you're here, in light of what we found, and what you continue to hear, what are policy practices and shifts that we need to make immediately, because we can't rest on our laurels, because there's still too many black children who are being disproportionately taken out of homes. What comes to mind for you in terms of policy and practice shifts that we can start to think about like yesterday?
Well, I want to repeat what you said. There are still too many black children being taken out of their home. And so, again, step one is we keep pushing, and we keep thinking in creative ways, and we keep trying things that appear to be working, and we keep watching to make sure that the needle's moving in the right way. One of the things that came out to me in the report, one of the benefits of the whole process, was having those conversations in the office. There were workers that were not aware, there were workers that were not educated, there were workers that weren't sensitive, and this started to make them open their eyes. This started to make them think about the consequences of their decision and the way we're treating different people differently, the way we're treating black families differently. So I think we need, if nothing else, more of those conversations, more training, more confrontation in a supportive way, but confrontation of race and bias by the people who are making the decisions in our offices. Another part of the report which I liked, and I don't mean to keep going back to it, but I think it's important is, DCFS is one part of a bigger system. How do we invest in community? How does DCFS show leadership of supporting families and community before they get to us? And how do we work with the systems of surveillance? How do we work with police? How do we work with teachers? How do we work with hospitals to make sure that the experience of families is just before DCFS gets involved? And that's not to deny responsibility. I own the whole thing. And like I said, even when kids are in care, we're not treating them the way they should be. But I think we need to get upstream, and I'm pulling this out of the report because I think it was great saying to me, and support and empower and resource community.
Yes. Thank you for that, man. I appreciate that, because I think in many ways, as you know, DCFS gets far more blame than in many cases it deserves, because these are larger systemic issues. Yeah, and that's great. And so I think two things can be true at the same time. So some of that can be earned, but we also have to think about this in terms of larger structural factors that continue to plague families of color, black families, indigenous families in disproportionate ways. So I want to thank you for lifting that up. It's been great talking with you, Brandon. I want to say thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your willingness to have these uncomfortable conversations. I maintain we need to get more comfortable being uncomfortable with these conversations. And they can't be one-time, one-off conversations. I think they will only begin to change once we continue to stay very vigilant around these issues, have data to inform our decision-making, calling folks on the carpet when they engage in practices that are deeply, deeply troublesome, and make sure that when we talk again, hopefully in the next year we continue to see not just a reduction in removals and referrals, but we see a significant reduction in disproportionality among black children and families. That's our goal, and I think with all the folks here in this room, we can begin to make that happen. So
I appreciate that.
And we give Brandon a round of applause.
Sorry.
name is Mia Mesa, and I'm a fourth-year nursing major here at UCLA. After graduating, I plan on becoming a pediatric and public health nurse.
My name is Brittany Hun. I graduated from UCLA with a degree in human biology and society, and am now a research assistant with the UCLA Pritzker Center, and I plan to start medical school in 2025. Together, we are pleased to introduce Los Angeles County Supervisor Holly J. Mitchell.
As the daughter of parents who are public servants and a third-generation Angelino, Supervisor Mitchell leads with a deep understanding of the vital safety net that Los Angeles County provides to millions of families.
Supervisor Mitchell currently serves on the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors, before serving on the first all-women-led Board of Supervisors in the history of LA County, in which she served for a decade in the California legislature.
Supervisor Mitchell is a champion for LA County's children and families. Under her leadership, the county has developed new strategies for prevention and guaranteed income. Supervisor Mitchell also passed over 90 bills while serving in the legislature, including the landmark anti-hair discrimination law, the Crown Act, making California the first in the nation to end hair discrimination. This law is personally meaningful to me because I recently led a hair product distribution program for Black youth in foster care. Supervisor Mitchell, thank you for your inspiration.
Among her many bold initiatives aimed at dismantling racism, classism, and implicit bias, Supervisor Mitchell was the author of the motion directing Los Angeles County DCFS to pilot blind removal. The LA Times quoted Supervisor Mitchell stating, "For decades, Black and brown children have been substantially overrepresented in LA County's child welfare system, and it's past time for us to change that." Supervisor Mitchell, welcome to the stage.
Happy Friday. Happy Friday. Aren't you? It's a sunshiny day. It's amazing. We're at Mudtown Farms, but on a wonderful space to be in. So thank you for the vision of bringing us together. As my board chair says, I have all the things in my head, First of all, thank you, Dr. Howard, for acknowledging the role I played in bringing the motion forward. And we said we wouldn't be here to work for the motion. So it made me think about, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for a mother and godmother who were social workers 60 years ago serving this exact geographic area, who through their example taught me that government should not cause more harm, that government should be the creative entity to meet people where they are.
That's right.
As opposed to expecting people to come find government, find the help, and for people to come figure it out through us.
That's right.
Number two, I would not be here if it were not for my work 30 years ago with then State Senator Diane Watson. And my experience as a young woman working for the Senate Health and Human Services Committee and analyzing the bill that created the level system for group homes and figuring out the reimbursement rate for level 13 and 14 and the criteria for kids, and knowing intuitively that congregate care is not where children should be. And let's remember where we were 30 years ago. 30 years ago, Diane Watson and I walked through Martin Luther King Hospital, where there's a picture in every magazine where she and I are palming 2 infants that were born crack exposed. And Dr. Zelina Bean, who would go home on Fridays, and the neonatal intensive care unit would have 1 or 2 infants, and she'd come back on Monday and they'd be in the hallway. And so I witnessed in a public policy lens the upending of our child welfare services system that we weren't prepared for. We weren't prepared for what the crack epidemic would do to families and children and decisions mothers were making, and how to prepare a system to care for children immediately and over time. That was the beginning of the revolution from my perspective, from the point in history where I've kind of entered, right? And to be a policy, be a staff and a policy wonk and a committee consultant during a time when we were trying to figure it out in real time. Government is reactionary. It had already happened. And we were trying to stand up facilities, and that we knew then weren't in the best interest of kids, but we couldn't onboard foster parents or equip foster parents quick enough because these children needed the additional services that we know group homes are providing now. I would not be here, that motion would not have come forward if we weren't in the time now. And the fact that the world saw George Floyd's murder and couldn't deny it, couldn't deny the root causes. So that's how I got here. And that's how that motion came to be, because of my own lived experience and understanding that through all of those cycles of external factors, Black and brown children and poor children, because we got to talk about class, the role poverty plays in children in our system, continues to play this role of disproportionality. I agree, these are hard conversations to have, but we don't get a pass just because they're hard and we don't get to have them. At least that's my perspective. Because you saw my picture there. I'm clear. As the only woman who looks like me in the Board of Supervisors, there are still county employees who pass by me and don't recognize that I'm a member of the board. And it's not because I'm not memorable. All 6 feet, blonde, dreadlock, tattooed me. I kind of stand out. But it's because in their perspective of what a Board of Supervisor is, I don't fit the model. And so, of the 114,000 of them, and 5 of us, county employees walk by me every single day and have conversations in elevators that they probably would not be having if they knew that the Board of Supervisors was in the elevator with them. So, when we talk about bias, we all own it. And I appreciate that's hard. And I understood and I heard the pushback. But one wonderful thing about being in a position of power, I don't shy away from that. I said I appreciate that there are folks who are uncomfortable with it. I wasn't suggesting that the blind removal pilot was going to be the end-all be-all. It was not. It is a tool in the toolkit. But because I am a member of the board, whether they know it or not, I have the power to bring forward motions, and I did. And these are conversations that we must continue to have. You know, Dr. Howard, I'm going to have to give this some thought, and maybe you're going to have to school me. But as I heard you say, one of the reasons we thought people had concerns was the notion of a color blindness. See, I don't see colorblind and blind removal as the same thing at all. And so what I am very appreciative of is with the resistance and the concern and what happened, what employees experienced was the creation of a safe space to have the conversations. I think that's important for us all to have space and time to be educated, to learn, and unearth, if for no one else but yourself, our own bias. Because as a woman of color, it doesn't mean I don't have bias against people who look like me. We have all heard the expression, skin folk don't make kin folk. And the bias we have according to class is real and omnipresent. And I have witnessed that in my days at Crystal Stairs, and I've witnessed it throughout my entire career. And so that's why having this conversation and doing a pilot, I have spent my entire public policy making career grounding policy in research. That's the whole point. And so to do this pilot created an opportunity for us to test the waters in addition to all the other programs that are being operated to see. I'm so excited about Supervisor Horvath's motion and the work that's being done on mandated supporters. All of these elements, I hope, will create for a system that brings true healing and support. Because as hard as it may be for workers in the system, to have these conversations, to acknowledge implicit bias. It is harder to be a victim of bias in the system. Trust and believe. That's what's really hard. For Brandon and I to sit as members of the First Five Commission and hear the data point that, correct me if I'm wrong, 1 in 3 black children under 5 have been touched by our child welfare services system since COVID. Brandon and I both took a collective gasp when we heard that data point. So as we talk about out-of-home placements being reduced, there is still a reality about children being touched by our system in some way. I'm hoping it's being touched in a positive way, where their families are giving the appropriate supports that they need to be successful, as opposed to the contrary, them being touched by that system, creating further complications to their lives. That's not our goal. So I am thrilled. I want to thank UCLA Pritzker Center. I don't know if you could hear me over there. I was the amen corner, seeing this amazing next generation of student leaders who are coming into this work at a time such as this, where these kind of conversations and this reality will become their normal. And so the fact that you are doing the study, educating the next generation, I think gives me great satisfaction. My goal as the supervisor for the 2nd District is to leave it better than I found it, and to do so by finishing communities. I learned this concept by a brilliant young organizer in the Central Valley, that we tend to blame people for the conditions in which they're living, and I appreciate you talking about, I think it was Brandon who mentioned that sometimes government played a direct role in creating disparity in communities. And so, and that we blame people who live there for the conditions in which they're living. And so this concept of, my team and I are watching our own language, and we're not saying underrepresented or underserved communities. It's unfinished neighborhoods. Because I have the pleasure of representing a district that is so diverse. It has a lot of both. Lots of finished neighborhoods, and lots of neighborhoods that are unfinished. Meaning they too should have access to particulate-free air, and clean water, and tree canopy, and green space, and community-based supports that help families when they need a little extra support and help, which we have all experienced, whether we are willing to admit it or not. The difference between us and some of them is there was someone there to catch us, and other families have not had someone there, or a line of credit, or a no eviction on your record, or someone there to just be. I'll close with this. Brandon, I think you'll both appreciate this. My team and I convene something monthly called our Racial Justice Learning Exchange. Thank you, Brandon, for attending, because these aren't one-off conversations. And for 2 years now, we've convened these monthly experiences open to constituents and county employees and our appointees to have a conversation about race. Last month, we were at Cal State Dominguez Hills talking about the role the media plays in implicit bias. We were having a meeting at Magic Johnson Park a couple Saturdays ago around street takeovers. Had about 200 community members there. We were picking their brains about solutions. And, I'll call it my Crystal Stairs days. I don't know, there was a mother there with a young baby, and I'm drawn to her. So I'm doing my thing with the baby. So I'm standing back talking to staff, watching the amazing community engagement. And I noticed she's at a tabletop by herself. So I don't want her, she can't go through the exercises by herself. So as they're about to break up into space, and I notice her get up with the baby and just, the baby's being a baby. She's 6 months. So I walk over, so I said, can I join your table and play with her? She said, you can hold her if you want. I said, you have some hand sanitizer? She said, yep. I said, can I put this blanket on the floor? You sure can. Blanket on the floor. And then it came out, because I'm feeling frustrated. And I said, I could see it. will you let me help you? She said, I welcome that. And I sat on the floor with this 6-month-old and defended my necklace, my sunglasses. And she was quick. And the mother said, I wish she was just walking. I said, why? Because that was the end of my life. Why do you want to walk so soon? She's 6 months. Well, because then I could wear her out. I said, I'm going to show you how to wear her out. Was some engaged, focused floor time. And I sat with her 6 months. Her legs never buckled. She walked up me, over me, for 90 minutes. I told Mama, go take one of these tables in the back so if I get in trouble you can see me. She went to the front of the room. You're gonna work this out, lady. But she sat where she was within my field of vision. So she'd look up, give me thumbs up. She needed some support. And when she had that, she went in and I didn't know who to watch. Her engaged in the tabletop exercise or this brilliant 6-month-old who was getting her way with me. She needed support. She found her way there that Saturday to engage in community, and we have a responsibility to make sure she's got support. Because we've all been frustrated. He's almost 24 and he frustrated me this morning. We've all been there. And how many families without the support, without the break to be able to breathe, just to step away for a minute and do something else. When you don't get that support, what happens? When that support doesn't exist for you anywhere. That's what we are trying to build. A system where support is there and shows up for you in a holistic, preventative way, as opposed to a punitive, biased way. So you all go back and tell your coworkers, she is the supervisor. Please, when you see her, she don't want you to say, yay, supervisor. She just wants you to not talk yang about the county when she's in the elevator. Thank you very much for inviting me today and the work you've done. I appreciate the partnership.
Can we thank Supervisor Mitchell one more time? Thank you so much. I would now like to, am I going to bring up our other esteemed guests? I don't have bios for them, but I know them personally. So let me start off with Dr. D'Artagnan Scorza. I go back with Dr. Scorza about, almost 20 years. I was teaching at UCLA, and I teach a big course with like almost 200 students. And most students come in, I think it may have been a Monday morning, 8 a.m. class. Most folks show up, most of my students show up, t-shirts, jeans, and flip-flops, and hoodies. And I noticed a young man who showed up every day in class with his blazer on, his tie on, and collared shirt. Every morning, he was there early, he took vociferous notes, he sat in the front of class. I'm like, who is this gentleman right here? That was my initial introduction to Dr. Scorza. And from that point on, he was a man on a mission. He told me a story about, he was a veteran, he wanted to help his community. And I look at him now with so much just awe. I'm not surprised of him being where he is now. He's heading up RD because he was always ambitious and always determined. So I want to welcome up Dr. D'Artagnan Scorza. Can we give him a round of applause, please? And then I also want to say, I would say the best for last, because she won't like this, but as I have entered into this space, there have been lots of folks who I have learned tremendous amounts from in this space. I'm looking at Winnie Wexford. She has enlightened me a lot about child welfare. Think about one of our co-authors. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Todd Frankie. Where's Todd Frankie? Todd Frankie. My co-conspirator in this work, Dr. Audrey Landry. Thank you for your support. I've learned so much. Dr. Tamara Hunter has been one of those folks too. She has been very much thoughtful and patient with me to help me understand systems and structures of how this system works. I've always appreciated your diligence, your deep concern for all families, but of intentionality on those who are most marginalized. So I want to thank you, Dr. Hunter, for enlightening me, and I want to invite you on up to meet Dr. Tamara Hunter. So we're going to engage in a conversation with these three leaders around this report and around issues around child welfare in general. So I want to first open it up by just getting some initial reactions to the report's findings, that the takeaway points being that removals and referrals are down, but racial disproportionality exists. Just some reactions.
First of all, thank you. I only had a suit and tie because I was on the Board of Regents at the time. But thank you for that, Dr. Howard. It's been an incredible pleasure to work with you for quite some time. You know, this report, what's incredible about this report, and just what I want to acknowledge, is that it explores one of the many approaches that DCFS has taken to reduce disproportionality, right, as we've been hearing about today. And it further expands upon the scholarship that looks at the effectiveness of not only this strategy, but in many ways, other strategies and practices that we could engage in. We know that there's a growing body of research that focuses specifically on what it takes to remove race in our decision-making processes. And what's great about this report is it articulates, like, you know, what it looks like to try. Like, what is the real what is this, you know, the process that we need to engage in to actually do that work, to recognize how difficult that work is, but to also acknowledge the benefits of engaging in it, to have those spaces, to have these conversations, and to lift up the hard work of a department who's been working diligently to reduce disproportionality in the child welfare system. So for that, I'd like to applaud Director Nichols and his team and his staff for their incredible work, because, you know, not everyone's trying. Not everyone cares to try. Not everyone even thinks it's important to try. And we're seeing across the country, a whole lot of people don't even want us to do it. So doing that here in LA County, I think, reaffirms the commitment of this institution to being an anti-racist organization, as well as, through the leadership of our board, a commitment to advancing equity and equality here in our system.
Thanks, Dr. Scorza. I'll start by saying that a Pritzker Center report always makes for a good literature review. Content is always a good source for a lit review. So I always appreciate that about a report that comes from this organization. I think that you did a great job of articulating the complexities of this pilot, of the issues and the complicating factors. I also think that you took a really balanced approach to illuminating the challenges and barriers that were experienced through this pilot period. I think the report, for me, it was incredibly instructive. As someone who is leading a large systems change initiative, it was very instructive on navigating the waters of systems change, which can be very rocky at times, right? So it was incredibly illuminating in that regard. And something else that stood out to me was the ways in which mental models shifted as a result of this approach. When you all have an opportunity to read the report, you'll see that some participants in the pilot shared the ways in which they changed their thinking and their mental models shifted with regard to the role of race in decision making. And I think that that was incredibly valuable. I think that the implications for practice changes were also very valuable. So those are some of the key takeaways for me from the report.
So thank you for the response. I want to highlight something Brandon talked about earlier, is that, and we lift this up in the report, that we found that there were upstream concerns, that oftentimes workers inherited disproportionate numbers of Black children. So the hotline comes into play. How do we start to think about this work more upstream, to see how we even begin to think about who gets investigated from the outset? And Supervisor Mitchell shared the data point about 1 in 3 children, Black children, under the age of 5 are touched. There have been other reports that show that 1 in 2 Black and Indigenous children are touched by the system before the age of 18. So how do we deal with upstream efforts to begin to address this issue?
And certainly that 1 in 2 statistic that you cite is for California, and the 1 in 3 number is specific to LA County during COVID. The work that I'm leading is the LA County Mandated Supporting Initiative, and it is our county's effort to reform mandated reporting. In May of last year, our board courageously, unanimously, and enthusiastically, and it's important to say that because they often pass motions unanimously, but they're not always enthusiastic about it, but they were about this work and the need to reform mandated reporting. It is extremely relevant to the subject of today's conversation because mandated reporting is the gateway into the child welfare system. I like to say that it is the point at which all society's isms, right, racism, classism, paternalism, formally intersect with the child welfare system. And the game is really rigged from the start. You cited some of the data. Here in LA County, Black kids are about 7.7% of our general population, but they are the subject of 19% of all reports that are made to the Child Protection Hotline, and they're the subject of 19% of all investigations that DCFS, investigations conducted by DCFS. We see the biases that are present in reporting sectors, law enforcement, education, healthcare, mirrored in reporting practices and the reporting behaviors of mandated reporters for the most part. So in many ways, it's a microcosm of what we see in society, what happens in the child welfare system. I could go on and on about this work, Dr. Hart. I don't know if you want me to say more about it.
Please do, yes. No, please do. You got the mic. Enlighten us.
So one of the goals of this work are to obviously ensure that children are not harmed. That includes the harm that is caused by abuse and neglect, but it also includes the harm that's caused by involvement with the child welfare system. Despite the efforts of fantastic leaders like Brandon, it is a machine and it is a source of profound harm for far too many kids and families. Another goal is to do a better job of providing supportive services to families upstream before maltreatment occurs and before there's a need for that family to come into contact with the child welfare system. And finally, the final goal of our work is to eliminate mandated reporting as a driver of racial disproportionality into the child welfare system. And we have a fairly comprehensive strategy involves improving the training and support that mandated reporters receive and giving them the tools to counter the biases that we all have. We have given people this extremely consequential responsibility, and we've utterly failed to prepare them for it. And we've failed to buffer against the biases that we know exist. And our families suffer for it, our Black families in particular. Another really important component, and then I'll stop talking, another really important component of this work is changing the narratives that root this really harmful policy response in place. That involves changing narratives that people hold about what it means to keep kids safe. We know that children are safe when their families are healthy, well, and thrive. It also means disabusing mandated reporters of the belief that the CYA reporting is harmless, right? So we help them understand that it's not. We talk about the harms of unnecessary reporting, and we lift up for them the consequences that are unique to Black and Indigenous families in particular, and how it triggers intergenerational trauma, because it wasn't that long ago in which formal family separation was used as a tool of, it was weaponized as a tool of oppression. And we talk about the ways in which the mere threat of a family being separated can trigger that trauma, because we know the trauma's epigenetic, and it can destabilize that family. And then we tell them, so now that you know better, you have a responsibility to do better. Finally, the last thing I'll say is that the problems with mandated reporting, the harms of the policy, can't be placed at the feet of mandated reporters. This is an issue that requires transformation at the individual level, the organizational level, and the systems level. And in that way, it mirrors the child protective system. The system is not the way it is because of the work of individual social workers, CSWs, who have a very grueling, thankless, and demanding job, and I know because I was one. It's institutional, and it's also systematic.
Yeah, so I'm so encouraged to hear about the mandated supportive work, Dr. Hunter. Yes, yes. Because one of the things that myself and Dr. Langley uplifted in a report we did for Dr. Scorza around barriers to bring about change with regard to racial disproportionality is that there's a culture of fear that exists in a lot of our reporting entities. I remember being a 22-year-old first-year teacher about 10 minutes away from here in Compton. And one of our first days of our training, they told us, listen, child abuse is rampant. And if you see something, say something. Don't ask questions, don't investigate, you need to report. And if you don't report, then you might run the risk of having your credential taken away, you might run the risk of losing your job, you might even run the risk of being charged with some type of criminal negligence of some sort. And so you could see all these brand new teachers just wide-eyed and bushy-tailed thinking, wow, if I see something, I'm supposed to say something. That still happens today far too often. And so part of why I think the mandated supportive work is important, because to change that culture of fear, we have to ensure that not just teacher educators and teachers in training, but also in police academies and in medical schools, all the different entities that we know that they report, that they know reporting, especially when it comes to issues of neglect, should be a last issue, not the first issue. So I want to see if either of you three can lift up, how do we change that culture of fear that we know exists from a lot of folks who are mandated reporters?
I'll be happy to start. I think the mandated supporting is one of our biggest issues. And it has to do with everybody taking responsibility for the health and well-being of children and families, and not just turning in a knee-jerk way to DCFS, who causes harm when we get involved with families. We do good work too. We keep a lot of kids safe. Bless my social workers that are out there keeping kids safe every day. But involvement in our system is tough, and it is never better than a kid being safely home with their parents. Never better. That's the goal. We need to engage community to give them resources and give them capacity to take care of families without calling us. If a teacher has an alternative that he or she knows will be there in a time of need to help a family that's wobbling, my hope is he or she turns to that alternative rather than calling the hotline. But today those alternatives don't exist in a lot of communities. And they know we'll step in and we'll help as we can, but we got to build community capacity to offer those alternatives. Two, there has to be a shift in the law. I mean, just bluntly, there is a law that says if you suspect that a child is subject of abuse or neglect and you don't call for a whole host of people, it's a misdemeanor. They're worried about going to jail, they're worried about getting sued. And three, it's an elephant in the room, but I'm going to say it. And Supervisor Mitchell said it the other day, and I'm so glad that she did. I've been thinking a lot about the comment. A kid's going to get hurt in our system. A kid is going to get hurt where we tried to work with the family. And what are we as a community going to do when that happens? Are we going to throw out all the reforms we've made, all the progress we've made, and start sweeping every kid into the system? Or are we going to say it's tragic that that kid got hurt, but we still need to make differences when it comes to bringing kids in that don't need to come in? And I do want to say this too. Part of why I believe in the mandated supporting thing so much is it's going to allow me to keep kids safer. We are spending resources today chasing families that don't need us. Of all the hotline calls we get, it's over 200,000 a year, only about 7% result in us opening a case with a family. We are wasting resources and attention on about 93% of the calls we get. I'd rather take those resources and invest them in the families that really do need us and not chase the families that don't need us.
So in addition to everything that Brandon just lifted up and articulated and what you shared, Dr. Howard, I would add that mandated reporting is also influenced by what I like to call hidden actors. Many people may not be aware that mandated reporting policy and training in large organizations, such as school districts, lives in the purview of their risk management divisions, their HR divisions, and is within the purview of their insurance carriers.
And their lawyers.
And their lawyers, exactly. Exactly. After the Boy Scout sexual abuse scandal, and insurance carriers had to pay out, I want to say $1 billion or so dollars, They lobbied, the insurance industry lobbied, and they had law passed that has given them significant influence over mandated reporter training and policy in the organizations that they insure. And they can decline to insure an organization if they don't believe that their policy is sound. So these are the hidden actors that influence mandated reporting as well. So it is not just the individual mandated reporters. And I think that we have to know about these hidden actors, know that they exist, and then frankly, disempower them so that we can empower mandated reporters to make decisions that are in the best interest of kids.
No, I appreciate that. So, Dr. Scorza, as the director of the Anti-Racism, Diversity, and Inclusion Initiative, we're talking about lifting up this conversation about race and child welfare. You have the monumental task of lifting up this conversation across the county. Y'all heard us say across the county. What are the challenges there as you try to help systems be much more anti-racist in their approaches, their policies, their practices? Where do you see promise, or where do you still run into barriers?
So that's a great question. As you all know, LA County, has one of the largest workforces in the region. roughly 38 departments. And one of the things that I've observed, one, within the county, is just our size, right, is a challenge. Not because people aren't committed, but because it is incredibly difficult to be able to saturate conversations around race and justice, both at the leadership level, but all the way down to the rank and file level, right? To reach everybody in the period of time in which we need to reach folk, to have like a courageous conversation or a brave conversation, it's just, the scalability around that is very, very difficult. The other challenge I think that we deal with is really related to how, as an institution, we work very diligently to carry out our programs on a day-to-day basis. So everyone is committed to, maintaining the social safety net, right? Getting out there and providing services on the ground in communities, doing the work that needs to be done. Well, it's kind of hard when you're trying to make sure someone gets a food voucher or they get a job to then have the capacity to turn around and do some of this work if it's not already baked in. So what does that look like in practice? I often talk about in our child welfare system how, as an institution, it emerged after 1935 with the Social Security Act, and over time was built to be what it is today. Well, if you are doing work that you've been told by the federal government is required because they've given you a grant and then the state has another requirement on top of that and they're giving you another grant for that, or they're telling you that you must follow these requirements, and then we get down to our local level, and there are also our own county requirements we must adhere to. By the time I come in here and I say, hey, let's have a conversation about racial equity and think of how you can do things different, you're already worried about the 15 other reporting requirements that you must engage in order to just maintain that funding to ensure that that funding can come through. So you can do the very basic thing that we're charged to do as an institution. So one of the things that we've been thinking about when we see opportunities is just helping folk just start by doing the job better, right? How do we reduce the time tax and the burden that people have when they're coming in to access food resources or food supports? How do we make sure that, not just asking the question, but examining the ways in which we're meeting outcomes and meeting deliverables? Can we just do a better job on a day-to-day basis to make sure that there is less of a burden for people to take advantage of resources, or less of a burden to contract with a county, or it's less difficult to get a grant or get resources with the county? So looking at how we function on a day-to-day basis and incorporating strategies that reduce barriers, I think, is an incredibly important approach to advancing racial equity. Not everyone wants to talk about race, and I said this earlier, but we have to have that conversation. And so building competencies to engage in that dialogue is incredibly essential for us to move forward. And one of the things that we're doing at RD is we're meeting with various departments right now. We're talking to directors, we're talking to staff to understand where they are facing challenges, what they may be dealing with that's making it difficult for them to have these conversations, and to also shift practices, review their policies, and set goals that help us achieve outcomes. And that review, that time has enabled us to build out new programs, reports, and new programs and services to those departments so that they can implement that work within their practices on a day-to-day basis.
If I can add, before I let Dr. Hunter and Director Nichols respond, I appreciate you saying we have to have the conversation about race. I also appreciate what Supervisor Mitchell said, it's also about class. I'm going to go one step further, it's also about gender too. Because when we look at who are the most disenfranchised members of our county, it's typically black and brown poor women, right? And then if we want to add that another part to this, I think we also can begin to look at sexual orientation, gender identity, because we see many of our TAY youth are oftentimes, again, black and brown women who are oftentimes queer, and that's another set of analysis we need to have. So our intersectional analysis is vital across the board as we do this work. So I appreciate you both lifting up that. Dr. Hunter, how do we have these hard conversations? Systemically, policy-wise, how do we do it?
We have these courageous conversations by not demonizing the folk at the table. I think that's where we have to start. You have the courage to have these conversations. You approach them with open minds and in spirit of inquiry, and not demonize. Supervisor Mitchell attended a meeting of the committee that I lead, that I'm the executive director of, and she engaged us all in this really cool interactive activity that allowed us to sort of, it was the elephant activity, remember that? Like there, if you touch a part of an elephant, different parts, you would envision it differently. You would think that it was a completely different animal. And I think that you have to approach courageous, difficult conversations with that spirit and try to understand the perspective of everyone at the table. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with them. It doesn't mean that your agenda cannot be to shift that perspective. But I think that's where we start.
Director Nichols, how do we make sure that these conversations don't just end that conversation, but they become transformative action, policy, and practice?
Maybe I start by thinking about myself. Probably shouldn't share that, but I do. Like, well, what am I going to do? But the truth is, I do think to some degree it comes down to leadership, prioritizing, making the space, and modeling it. I mean, again, maybe I'm thinking about myself too much. Me being here, having this conversation on the stage in front of community and my staff is what I expect the people directly under me to do. And it's what I expect the people under them to do. And I'm doing it in part because the Board of Supervisors is giving me the guidance and direction to do it. Secondly, I think it's people holding us accountable to it. This is a moment in time. I said it I think the best time to be the director of DCFS. I'm going to be gone one day. This moment may be gone one day. We may forget the conversation we've had one day. If we do that, the needle's going to go back the wrong way. Right. People need to keep paying attention. They need to keep knocking on my door. We all need to keep meeting at a table. Because if we don't, the momentum dies. So I think accountability to the community holding us accountability, that's going to be a big part of it too.
Supervisor raised her hand and said, can she say something? Can you say something? Come on now, please. You don't have to ask.
I didn't want to miss this opportunity and point in time, because everybody understands the power dynamic between the board and department heads. And let me say publicly what I've said to you privately, and I will have your back. Because having these courageous conversations are not without hiccup and challenge. The LA Times gonna say something. And as long as we are clear about this shared goal, it's important for me to also say I have your back as we try to do this really hard work together. And to be grown up and say, we're gonna hit a bump and somebody's not gonna be happy, but that will not cause my knees to buckle in terms of my leadership and my role, holding you accountable, but also being supportive for us to continue this really important work.
Well said. Thank you. I also want to say before we give my last question to our panelists here is that it's important that we also not just look at these numbers and not forget the actual lives that they represent. Because these are real stories. We were fortunate enough to be able to do some work around courageous conversations with support from the Foster Together Network, and Taylor was part of those discussions, and so was Dr. Hunter. And I can't tell you, many of you in this room know, to hear the raw emotion, the trauma, the pain, the hurt that comes from parents who had their children taken away, to talk to young people who were separated from their families inexplicably, to hear people just bawl their eyes out, to talk about they did not get answers, they felt like they were being pawns of the court, they felt like they were doing everything they were asked to do, but yet still could not find a way to get their children back. It's important for us to listen and hear these stories, because these stories are people's lives. And I always say, but by the grace of God, there go I. If that were any of us, we can't even begin to imagine the pain, the difficulty, and just the deep-seated hurt of not knowing where your children are, if they're going to be reunited, who are they with, are the systems working for me or against me? So as much as we look at numbers and data and trends upward and trends downward, I ask that we not lose sight of the fact that these are actual lives of people who live right in this community, who oftentimes don't see government as an aid, but see government as something to be feared, and they want no connection whatsoever with these systems. So let's not forget those names and faces and lift them up as much as we can. That makes sense?
Talk about it.
Okay, all right. Last question. What keeps you up at night? What gives you hope?
But I just want to reflect for a second on what you said, Dr. Howard, because that's solid gold. That let's remember the kids. I threw out a number earlier, 42% reduction in the entry of Black children into care. But there is another number behind that. That's 1,400, and I think it was like 50 kids less that were living with their parents today than 3 years ago would have been in foster care, and a lot of those kids would have grown up in foster care. 1,400 kids in this community, probably just right outside this door somewhere. 1,400. That's got to think my social workers, think our cultural brokers, our ERDD roundtable participants. You kept 1,450 kids home safely, and safety's a part of it. Yeah, it's what keeps me up at night, and that's it. It's safety. We're going through radical change. We are out on a limb. We're doing different things that we've never done before. Some of it, I don't want to say it's experimental, but we don't know the data. We think we're doing the right thing, but we're not sure. It's studies like this that are helping show us. I worry kids going to get hurt, and that we're going to be so moved and upset by it because it's awful. It's like the worst thing that can happen. That we're going to lose our way. Because when a kid gets hurt, it's so tragic. It hits us all at our core. It knocks us at our root. And sometimes we act crazy because we want kids to be safe. It is our core mission. Everybody believes kids should be safe. Everybody loves their kids. And I worry that we lose our way.
Dr. Hunter, what gives you hope? What keeps you up at night?
The same fear keeps me up at night. I share Brandon's fear about safety, given the work that I'm leading on mandated reporting reform. What gives me hope is this moment in time. For me, this work is a way of making amends for the harm that I caused when I was a 23-year-old social worker, fresh out of MSW school, knocking on doors and separating families without thinking about the consequences. So this work is deeply meaningful, it's deeply personal. And I'm incredibly hopeful about this moment in time.
Thank you. That's story. What gives you hope? What keeps you up at night?
November 2024 keeps me up at night. But moreover, it is the political direction of the country and the loss of momentum for this work is what keeps me up. And so, we're seeing across the country this regression, this pushing back against, anti-racism, this pushing back against diversity and inclusion and belonging. And even though we are, our board has doubled down on this work, my concern is that that the laws of the land will change again on us, right? This has happened cyclically over and over again. Every time we make progress, somebody finds a way to come in and undermine that progress. But what gives me hope is that we've always figured out a way, right? We've always found a way to deal with, to navigate through, to overcome, to push ahead, to make progress, even when the political winds shift. So I'm like grateful for moments like this today, because it reaffirms for me how important it is to be in this together, to be moving in this work together. It reaffirms the importance of our political leadership here locally. And it also reaffirms for me why we're doing this work. As Brandon just pointed out, this is for our children and our families. This would have been for me, right? For so many of us. I was telling some folk earlier, I grew up not too far from here. Right around the corner, I won't tell you the street because it's like one of my secret streets, you know, one of my secret passwords. But I grew up like right around the corner from here. I used to walk by that my mom worked in that center right there, the MLK Center. I was born at King Hospital. Like this, you know, this would have been me and my family, right? And so that's what gives me hope, is that we're all in here in this room trying to make sure that kids like me and kids like many of us have a future, we have an opportunity. So I just want to thank Pritzker, I want to thank our supervisor for leading this work. I want to thank our colleagues here in the county for helping to advance this effort, and just remain grateful for all of you as well.
Can we give our panel a round of applause, please? Before we close, I'm big on acknowledgments, and again, I'm acknowledging this panel, but this work does not happen without a lot of really committed and invested people. I see my Dean Tina Christie in the back, who's a big supporter of our work. I want to give her a round of applause. Thank you, Dean Christie. I'd be remiss if I did not mention the unbelievable support we've got from the Pritzker Foundation. I see Winnie and Laura are here. I want to give them a big round of applause. Thank you for their support. Well, they knew when they decided to partner with us, we were going to do work that was not always easy, that was not always comfortable, but that was necessary, and they've been unbelievably supportive the entire time. I ask you all to read the report and give us feedback, to critique the report, give us feedback on the report. It is not a perfect study. No study is, but we are always trying to find ways to be better. This study does not come together without the work of Brenda Tully. I want to shout her out. Louder, I can say thank you. Under the direction of guidance of myself and Todd Frankie. Todd has been our methodology specialist. Thank you, Todd Frankie. And I also acknowledge folks in this room who've been on the ground. I'm looking at Angela, I see Cynthia, folks who sit in rooms and hear some horrific things being said about family, but you still show up. And you basically hold your tongue to not say things that you know you want to say to folks, but need to be said. Thank you for being in the trenches, because it's not easy, but you show up every single day. I see Reggie too. You're another one of those folks who shows up every day. Kimala, we've had our conversations about this, right? We don't always agree, but we always have the same goal, right? So I appreciate you. I mean, and there's so many other folks I could name. I can't say thank you enough. And it means a lot for Brandon to show up here, because he could easily have said, you know what? I'm busy that day, I've got meetings that day, but he's saying to show up, and he's here, and he's responding to the hard questions. Again, I have to say thank you to Supervisor Mitchell. She didn't give her remarks in bounds. She stayed. She part of the conversation. Thank you, guys. This is beautiful for her. Again, folks, this gets better when we collectively begin to put our resources and our efforts and our expertise together. I just so appreciate what Dr. Scorza said about how these children and these families that we talk about, in so many ways, it could have been us, or we're just one person, one situation removed from some of these circumstances. And so that's why we have to continue to keep our foot on the pedal to make sure that we keep fighting until there are no children who are separated from their families. That's the goal, to make families whole, to make them healthy, and to make them sustainable across the board. Another shout out before I close, Taylor Dudley. Taylor was like, listen, she was in line with Supervisor Mitchell's preferences, desires, and I so appreciate this about Supervisor Mitchell. We can't always ask folks to come to the West Side. We got to get out of the West Side and come to communities where folks are living. So thank you for making sure that we are here. This amazing, I feel like we should go on a self-guided tour around what time. This is an amazing facility. facility, amazing work that's going here, and amazing on an amazing day. So thank you, Taylor. You told me not to take questions, but I see one gentleman who was like insistent. I'm going to honor your question. Please, go ahead.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Ron Brown with Children's Bureau, community-based organization serving the county. This is really important information. How can we, as a community-based organization, how can my partner organizations use this information? How can we share this? How can we act on it? What can we do to help youth?
Thank you, Ron. I'm going to let my panelists respond to that. Thank you for that question, Ron. You never know when somebody asks a question. It turns into a statement, not a question. But you ask a question. I appreciate it.
Ron, look at me. You're going to go first. Thank you for the question, Ron. I mean, really, as a community-based agency, you are well positioned to support families in your community that are wobbling. It's going to be the trick of government to help get you access to the resources to do that, but I need you to be there to reach out, and sometimes you're going to do it with resources that I can't give you, and I know you're doing it today, and I appreciate that. There's other agencies in here too. I see a lot of 3FN folks. It's people like that that serve as stabilizing communities, anchors that are going to keep families whole and healthy so they never have to come into the system in the first place. So I thank you for the work you're doing. I hope we can grow it and grow it and grow it.
I know we're in South LA and we talk often about the needs that are here in our community, but I also want y'all to start thinking about the Antelope Valley. This is where a lot of folks are moving to. We get a lot of attention up there. It's a transportation desert, it's a food desert. It is difficult for people to get access to resources, and it has been ignored for decades.
Thank you.
And it's where a lot of black folks are at. So just keep that in mind.
That's a good one.
Hold us accountable. Hold us accountable.
With that being said, folks, thank you for being here. Take time to interact with everybody, talk to folks, build with folks, and let's keep up the good work. Thank you so much.